How's it going, everyone? The Canadian province of Ontario is having elections at the end of February, and that election might have a significant impact on Canadian-US relations. We're going to talk about why. We're going to look at the numbers, the election rules, some polling data, talk about industry, and we will see why these elections may be so important. So, let's get into it. Canada and the United States are having some intense trading negotiations. American President Donald Trump has threatened tariffs against Canada unless Canada cracks down on certain elements of its border security. But from the American perspective, they might not really have someone to negotiate with in Ottawa. The reason why is because Canada's ruling party, the Liberal Party, is at a 22% approximately approval rating. And there's an election coming up in Canada, federal election, absolute latest would be in fall of 2025, but it could be as early as spring. And in that federal election, it's expected that the Conservative Party, who currently has a 45% approval rating, with Liberals very far in second place at 22%, that Conservative Party is expected to win. In fact, they're expected to win a majority of seats in Canadian Parliament, giving them lots of power in the country. So from the American perspective, they might feel, well, we can just wait for the Conservatives to come to power and make a deal with them. And because Donald Trump is from the Republican Party, he may feel it's easier for him to negotiate with Canada's Conservative Party once they are in power. Now, on top of that, the Liberal Party is busy scrambling to select a leader for the election. The current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has declared that he will not run in the next election and plans to resign as soon as the Liberal Party has selected a new leader. So the election might be as soon as spring 2025, and the Liberal Party still has not selected a leader who will be running for Prime Minister in that election. So with the Liberal Party possibly uncertain what direction it's even going to be moving in, and busy selecting a leader, negotiating a very important trade deal with the United States could be difficult. So, who can the United States negotiate with? Well, enter Ontario. Okay? Ontario is Canada's most populous province, with a population that is about 40% of Canada's entire population. Ontario's GDP is almost 40% of Canada's GDP. And Ontario also has within it Canada's capital city, Ottawa, Canada's largest city, Toronto, and the entire Great Lakes region, at least the Canadian side of it, and is one of the world leaders in nuclear technology, and specifically nuclear energy related technology, nuclear medicine, as well as post-secondary education in the STEM fields, with a number of universities specializing in different STEM fields, all in Ontario. Now, that's especially important these days because there's more demand for energy. There's more demand for clean energy, and nuclear energy is the only energy production method that we have that can meet modern energy demand and yet is not based on burning fossil fuels. Now, if you're interested in nuclear energy, there's a separate video I have where I break down the discussion about nuclear energy that Donald Trump and Joe Rogan had recently on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I'll put a link to that in the description. Now, what's important in terms of STEM education, that's science, technology, engineering, mathematics, is, well, a lot of AI development is happening, so STEM technology is going to be especially important, although it's always important. So, just to put it into perspective, imagine in the United States, there was a huge state that included 40% of the American population. It included the largest city, New York. It included the capital, Washington, D.C. It included all the cities in between. Plus, it included the entire Great Lakes region, the American side of it, and some rural areas surrounding it as well. Okay, so imagine if you have Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and the East Coast from New York all the way down to Washington, D.C. Imagine all of that as one huge state. That is what Ontario is to Canada, okay? Clearly a very important province. And the leader of Ontario is Doug Ford. Doug Ford is from Ontario's Conservative Party, and he has won 2 landslide election victories in a row. He came to power in 2018, winning 76 seats. That's a majority of seats in Ontario's parliament. If you look at an election map here, most of Ontario's population is down here in southern Ontario, which is the most southern part of the Great Lakes region. And so you see it's all blue. Okay, in Canadian politics, blue is the conservative color. Red is the liberal color. Orange is a party called the NDP. It's more farther left wing than the Liberals. Okay, so you see this most populated region of Ontario, where the major cities are, it's pretty much all blue. That was 2018, where Ford won, where was it? 76 seats. Next election was 4 years later in 2022, where Ford won even more seats, 83. Okay, if we look at the election map, there it is. Okay, so again, southern Ontario, where the bulk of the population is, where all the major cities are, it's pretty much all blue, which is the conservative color. That's Doug Ford's party. So that election happened in 2022. Okay, now the next election is scheduled for 4 years later, which is 2026. But based on the election rules in Ontario, the premier can call an early election. And Doug Ford did just that. The election is happening at the end of February. And if he wins, he's in power for the next 4 years, which is until 2029. Now, what happens in 2029? Well, that is when Donald Trump's second term is over. And probably Doug Ford is going to win. If we look at polling results for Ontario, his party, okay, the Conservatives right now in Ontario have 42% of the popular vote. First place. Second place is the Liberals with only 26%, very far behind. In terms of seats in Parliament, which is actually how you win an election in Ontario, you need 63 seats to win a majority. If you have a majority, it means you don't have to negotiate with other parties to pass what you want to pass. So you need 63 for a majority, and Ford is projected to win 91 seats. So it's a very advantageous time for Ford to have an election, and Ford's opponents are suggesting that that is the precise reason he's having an election now, because it's so likely that he's going to win a majority and guarantees for himself being in power until 2029. But Ford is claiming that he called this early snap election right now for a different reason. He's saying that he needs a mandate to negotiate a trade deal with Donald Trump. See, with the federal government having a struggle negotiating with the United States, Trudeau and Trump don't really get along very well. The federal government, the Liberal Party, is likely going to get voted out of office at some point in 2025. Anyways, they're busy scrambling to find a candidate to run in the upcoming election. With them having those issues, Ford has actually been making the rounds on American media, talking about how he wants to meet with Donald Trump, he wants to negotiate a trade deal, almost kind of acting like Canada's foreign minister. Okay, now Ford is not only the Premier of Ontario, Canada also has a Council of the Federation, okay, which is a council of the premiers of Ontario's 10 provinces and Canada's 10 provinces and Canada's 3 territories, okay? These premiers meet to discuss how they'll work together, right? Premiers in Canada, it's like governors in the United States. And Ford is the chair of that council, okay? So he represents this committee of Canada's premiers as well. And this council is going to be heading to Washington, D.C. on February 12th, okay? Look at this. Premiers will meet with key members of the new administration, Congress, and business leaders to advocate for maintaining strong Canada-U.S. relations by addressing shared issues, jobs, economy, energy, critical minerals, and so on. Now, we also have, in addition to the joint mission on February 12th, some premiers, and I believe that includes Ford as well, will also travel to Washington during the annual meeting of the National Governors Association on February 20th to 22nd. Okay, so he's really playing this role here. Now, imagine if he had not called this early election. Well, then who is Ford? He's the leader of a Canadian province who might be out of power next year, 2026. So if Washington feels that negotiating with Ottawa is kind of pointless right now, well, why would they feel it's useful negotiating with Ford? He's the leader of a province. He might be out of power next year. But with this election called now and Ford being so likely to win, well, now he's a completely different person from the American perspective. Now Ford is someone who's going to be most likely leading Canada's most populous province, Ontario, and Ontario has those other important things about it we discussed at the start of the video, GDP, industry, major cities, and all that. And he's going to be in charge of Ontario the entire time that Trump is serving his second term. No matter what happens with the federal government in Ottawa, the entire time that Trump is serving his second term, Ford is going to be the leader of Ontario, most likely. That is what Ford looks like now. And that makes him a much more serious person for Washington to take seriously and to negotiate with. So this really changes the game here, possibly, and might change the tone of negotiations between the U.S. and Canada. And it's important to keep in mind here that Ford is the leader of Ontario's Conservatives, and the party projected to win in Canada's next federal election, also with a majority government, is the Conservatives, led by Pierre Poilievre. And with Ford calling this election and most likely winning, this is kind of a way for the U.S. to start negotiating with a conservative who has power already. And again, will have power Trump's entire second term, regardless of what happens with Canada's federal government. And let's just take a closer look at the polls in Ontario. Not only is Ford so ahead with 42% of the vote, first place, second place being Liberals with 26%, and projected to win 91 seats, needing only 63 for majority. But when we look at the details, in every demographic in this recent Ledger poll, Ford is ahead. Okay, if we look at different regions of Ontario, okay, we have Metro Toronto, other parts of the Greater Toronto Area, the more southern Hamilton, Niagara region. We have South Ontario, East, North. In all of those places, Ford has more support than anyone else. 38, 53% in other parts of the Greater Toronto Area, 52% in South Ontario, 51% in the East. But in all of these parts of Ontario, he's got more support than any other candidate. Okay, both male and female voters, okay, 50% of males support Ford, 42% of females. Again, that number is higher than the percent of females that support any other candidate. We look at all age groups, 18 to 34, 35 to 54, 55 plus. Again, we have 41% support, 49%, 48%, Again, there's more than two parties in Ontario politics. So, percent in the 40s is actually quite high. Now, if we look at what is it that Ontarians care about the most, okay, if they're asked what is their number one issue, well, look at the number one issue here. Cost of living. 28% of those polled said that is the number one issue for them. Okay, now look at the other issues. Mostly they have to do with the economy. Okay, so second place we have healthcare. What's third place? The economy, 11%. Okay, then we have healthcare access to a doctor. Then we have healthcare wait times. And then what's next? U.S. relations, including Trump's tariffs. Okay, 5% said that that's the number one issue. Affordable housing, that also has to do with the economy, 4%. What do we have? Taxes in general, 3%. Employment and youth unemployment, 2%. Carbon tax, 2%. Okay, all of these things have to do with the economy. If we add up all of these numbers, okay, we have 28 who say cost of living. We have 11 for the economy. We have 5 for U.S. relations, including Trump's tariffs. 4 for affordable housing. 3 for taxes in general. Then we have 2 for employment or unemployment, and another 2 for carbon tax. If we add all those up, we have 55%. Okay, so 55% of those polled said their number one issue is something to do with the economy. And guess what Ford is trying to lead negotiations with the U.S. on? A trade deal, the economy. Okay, so the fact that this election is happening makes it more likely that Washington sees Ford as a much more serious negotiating partner, since he will most likely now be there during Trump's entire second term. So that is how Ontario over here may be playing a very significant role in shaping the future of Canada-US relations. I hope you enjoyed that, and see you next time.